if we've been misled about the nature of the Earth, which I think the evidence is overwhelming that we have been, it would be very naive to think that we have a perfect depiction of the very thing that we were misled about.
Is this an inaccurate depiction or?
Yeah,
inaccurate?
Straw man.
What's wrong with that picture?
Well, just like a disc in space. I don't know what.
It's just the demographics of the continents and how far they are away and the seas and everything. That's pretty accurate.
It's pretty accurate. When you get to the south, it's interesting because we actually dug into the GPS data, and in the south they make what's called meridian corrections. So they actually are pulling out land, like distance, out of the meridians. In between the meridians, which
you have to. Whenever you flatten a globe, you have to do that.
Well, what I'm saying is, if it's really a globe, right, then we wouldn't have to do that for the actual raw GPS data, but they do. They also make SAGNet corrections, which is another falsification of relativity.
Well, that should tell you that the GPS is based on a globe Earth.
Well, of course, but the point is that they have to run it through corrections to get the final longitude output, which shouldn't happen. And this is what I want to point out, though. Like, there are physical tests that show that the Earth's not curving at the rate that they say that it is. So the Earth is measured flat. I wonder if we could all agree on this, that flat Earth is actually the default position, because it's always flipped around, right? Well, the horizon's horizontal. When we build things in civil engineering, we actually use plane survey. We do it flat. We connect horizontal. So bridges, runways, railways, canals, when we fly planes, all aviation, we have to treat the Earth like it's flat. Sea level, elevation is a distance above that. Whenever we actually got the latitude system, we took elevation angles to Polaris from a flat horizontal baseline that extended all the way to the zenith.
That doesn't prove anything.
No, well,
it just proves that map works.
Trilateration only works on the globe, though. You can only get your position from the globe. Like, you have to actually know the orbits of the satellites.
But there is no satellites.
I have a
no, there are satellites. Satellites disprove heliocentrism, and the actual path is nothing more than a projection. So
I have a quick question. It was very rudimentary, not going to get into deep science or anything. I once flew to New Zealand, and I'm looking at these flat Earth maps, and I'm like, I can't quite explain the path of the flight as it pertains to the flight I actually went on. So I know which direction we left from the airport, and I know I did not fly north or westward.
You're over water the whole time? Most of the time? Yeah.
And so that would imply that after we flew south beyond the visual, the ability to identify any landmass, the plane then hooked right. So it implies that when I flew from New York to Los Angeles to New Zealand, and I got these maybe these maps are inaccurate representations of what flat earthers believe, but if I left from Los Angeles and we started flying south, which we did, as soon as we left the visual area so that no one on the plane could identify it, the plane then turns right. So it flies straight down and then hooks right instead of just flying straight to New Zealand. I don't believe that happened.
Well, planes are always making corrections based on cardinal direction. So you're not going to be able to tell in a plane, but
I can tell that we didn't fly west or north. And so when we departed, we were flying south.
If you left South America and went to New Zealand, you could go there on a globe map straight to New Zealand. If you turn that into a flat Earth map, the flat Earth map would require you to dip down to make like a semicircle and then go up to New Zealand. That's a fact.
Well, yeah, there are many paths that make more sense on, like, say, the azimuthal projection than the globe, and they claim all kinds of things. They didn't stop for gas or whatever. And I'll make it very clear, actually, I don't claim definitive projections. If we've been misled about the nature of the Earth, which I think the evidence is overwhelming that we have been, it would be very naive to think that we have a perfect depiction of the very thing that we were misled about. Of course we don't. Now, in the north, or 90% of the world population here, we have a better grasp of it, but it's just a projection thing. And bringing up the satellite thing, that's kind of like a misnomer that, like, satellites can't exist on a flat Earth. Actually, satellites, for one, disprove heliocentrism, because they actually have to account for inertial forces. They account for centrifugal forces, which are considered fictitious and pseudo forces in your paradigm. They can't exist. So if there are actually satellites being put up there, they're accounting for the angular momentum of a rotating universe around a stationary Earth with inertial forces, centrifugal, Coriolis, and Euler forces. Those can exist in your paradigm. They don't exist in Newtonian mechanics. Those are forces external to Newtonian mechanics, and they don't exist in Einstein. So just point that out.
It's trying to...
Satellites are actually, I love them. This idea that I'm scared of satellites. Well, I see Starlinks. I watch many launches. I don't have a problem with it. I have a Starlink. You know, I haven't set up the internet yet, but I have one.
How do they stay up there?
Well, that's the equations. The physics and equations say they're using the spinning universe. That's what is factually in the equations. It says that it uses centrifugal force. So like if you had a ball tied to a rope and you spin it, right, it's going to keep going in a circle because you're pulling it, but the ball has a tendency to move out away from you. It's going to keep going around because you're pulling it. That's called centrifugal force. They have to account for this and the real Coriolis force, which is like an inward centripetal force, so a radially inward force for the satellite equations. According to the heliocentric model, there is no such thing. That shouldn't.
How would they stay above a flat?
They're on balloons. Type in satellites on balloons. I'm telling you,
They're not all on balloons.
They're not all on balloons, but there's satellites that were on balloons.
Yeah,
from
it was called
Samsung.
Project Loon.
I'm just saying. So
Google
they say
Google
there's
launched
satellites.
a bunch of balloons carrying internet nodes.
Exactly.
So they could float over
I'm
the
saying.
earth.
Well,
So
the
that's not a
military-
conspiracy.
the military
I'm just saying,
also
they
has
use
them.
balloons, and NASA is the user.
So
more
Elon's
helium
actually
than-
just launching balloons, but putting on
You
a
can
show.
type in.
No,
you
no,
can
I
type in
don't
NASA. They do balloon launches. Literally,
I know.
type in.
Yeah, they
right.
can do that if it's low Earth orbit. But if you have a weather satellite that's out there at 22,200 miles, you're not going to get a balloon out there.
See, I totally disavow those distance claims, and because the way that
measured
they
them
do it, they
myself.
take the signal and that's cool. So what equation do you use to determine distance?
Parallax. You just use simple trigonometry. It's basic trigonometry.
Really? So what's the length of your baseline?
Well, let's see. For space station, it was 760 meters.
760-meter baseline to determine the distance to the space station.
Yep.
Okay, and so you're saying it's impossible for the ISS to move over a plane.
What does that have to do with me measuring the distance? You can assume it's a plane. You can assume it's a globe.
Well, earlier you said trilateration was impossible.
Trilateration is about you finding your location. I'm
Right.
talking about measuring the altitude of the
Which
space
you
station.
need your location. So that you need your location.
I just know the baseline.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you need your location. That's the prerequisite. So the point I was making is I don't believe when he claims something's 22,000 miles away. I don't believe that. But he can. I don't.
The moon
right?
is to 240,000 miles away.
Yeah, see, I definitely don't believe that. And but this is the thing. The way that they get the distances, they actually use, of course, the equation for speed, and they assume the medium, the propagation rate of light, and they get how long it takes, the duration of signal to get there, right? And then they plug it into the assumption of the speed of light relative to the vacuum, and then they're going to supposedly get their distance. I disavow those assumptions. I don't think that's true.
Well, you guys are all wrong. The Earth is clearly hollow and flat. It's a donut.
Well, Vice is stupid. You know that.
We're in a donut magnetic field. I want to answer the firmament thing, though, the idea of putting them inside the firmament. All the early church fathers, even, but like many people throughout all of like biblical history, they said that there were layers to a container. A physical container had layers, and the sun, moon, and stars are inside those layers of the firmament. And in fact, that they're specific to layers, meaning like the sun and moon and the stars are in a separate layer. So that would be how that's explained.
It's not explaining it.
Why not?
Because the Hebrew word is beirakia, which does not mean in or inside, like you're trying to say. You're trying to say that somehow you have the dome, and then there's the inside underneath the dome.
There are
Okay.
layers inside of it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's
Multiple
what you're trying to
domes.
say. But that's not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew says it's in the firmament.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the definition of firmament is solid, how are the celestial bodies going to be in the firmament, not underneath? Because there's a lot of ways in Hebrew to say underneath the firmament.
Well, they're within the solid firmament.
And
I
there's-
think the
wait a second, and there's a lot of ways to say that the celestial bodies are over the firmament.
Well, they're not above or
In
below
Hebrew.
because there's layers. They're within it.
the easiest way to
Yeah,
understand.
but you can't have that if the firmament's solid. That's what I'm trying to say.
But ice and water can go from solid, so maybe it could change.
No, no,
Well,
there's
solid is a
layers
solid.
to
It's
it.
not water.
I think the easiest way to understand the firmament is for anybody who's ever played World of Warcraft, and you try and go too far south, and your character just keeps walking into what's an
There you
invisible
go.
wall.
The best argument is that the physical antecedent for gas pressure is a container, right? Because the gas pressure would fill the available space. Second law of thermodynamics, entropy increases. So if we actually had an atmosphere next to vacuum, it would fill the available space. So where people just blindly throw out the word gravity, even though
So-
they don't even have a theory that works, and it wouldn't explain it anyway.
Is
But if gravity worked, you would have to admit that an atmosphere would be possible, right?
No, not next to a vacuum. It violates the second law of thermodynamics.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Because how do we have a pressurized
because
system?
You're right, because they don't the Torr measurement of vacuum in space. They don't know whether it's 10 to the minus 6 or 10 to the minus 17. They have no way to measure it. So if it's 10 to the minus 6, we're safe. The atmosphere is not going to be sucked out. If it was 10 to the minus 17th, yeah. The atmosphere would be sucked out, but that means both your theory and my theory would be wrong.
Well, there's
wait,
something
wait, hold
I
on,
think
hold
there's
on.
something containing.
why can't they measure it? Couldn't you?
They can't get an exact figure. They know it's between
If we
10
had
to the
if we
minus
had
6.
consistent access to Mars, could you
If we what?
had consistent access to Mars?
Mars, I don't think would have anything to do with it. In
Well,
my
you're
opinion.
two different gravitational bodies giving
Yeah,
us
but
a
you're
reference.
talking about outer space.
Right, and
What's
so
the vacuum in outer space?
if Mars can't maintain an atmosphere the size of Earth, due to, what,
Yes, he's saying if you were able to like kind of sit on Mars and make more like calibrated measurements.
what's the rate at which the atmosphere dissipates for Mars if it can't maintain, or the Moon or something?
Well, it's a lot more because it has less gravity.
Right. So then you could measure the baseline by which what is the amount of mass required to sustain an atmosphere. You could then determine if it's not going to hold it because the vacuum is pulling on it.
You could, maybe. But I'm just telling you what the books say.
And the gas pressure the way that we actually even do the equation for gas pressure is a physical barrier, because pressure is the energy or force exerted on the walls of a container. So you need to even have pressure, to even invoke pressure, it presses on the walls of a container.
So, real quick, sorry. The presumption of why the Earth has an atmosphere is because the gravity is holding this matter to the Earth.
Yes.
And for Mars, there is not enough. The gravity is weaker, so the atmosphere is much thinner because it can't hold as much.
That's why Saturn and
gravity's
Jupiter have a much thicker atmosphere because more gravity.
But gas disperses in all directions on the surface where gravity would be the strongest, right? Like gas goes in all directions. You can't just have a vacuum next to a gas pressure on the surface. Gravity's the strongest here. So that's the modern model just isn't true. It defies physics. And I'm waiting for an answer to that. If gravity is the strongest at the surface,
The atmosphere is a gradient, and I've got a simulation that I programmed myself that's on my channel that shows a simulated planet with gravity holding onto an atmosphere. And yeah, it's a gradient. As you go further out, it goes closer.
Yeah, air gets thinner.
invoked a simulation.
Air gets thinner the higher you go up.
Even
That's why people
then-
die on
even
Mount Everest.
then,
Yeah, there's
we have
definitely a gradient.
hydrogen that escapes out into outer space because it's just too light for the gravity to
Oh,
hold
so
on.
so gravity picks and chooses between some
No,
of the
it's
gas.
because the hydrogen is lighter than helium.
Why does all the hydrogen not leave?
Because we have enough gravity that it has to seep out slowly.
That's the pick and choose. And in the
No, it's not picking and choosing. That's the physics of
my
it.
question really is: we all agree gas disperses in all directions, right?
So what?
Okay, so gravity's not actually pulling the air down as you're claiming to where it keeps it next to a vacuum. It disperses in all directions where gravity is the strongest.
Well, what is your explanation for gravity?
Well, I mean, I would say that everything for density and buoyancy is a major part of it, because it's all just pressure mediating relative to its medium, right? So ping pong, golf ball. But I would say, and this is what I say, I don't speak for anyone else, that everything's electric. And so everything that exists is electrostatic. Literally everything that exists. There's not one exception. Everything's electric. And that's 10 to the 36 power stronger than gravity's even claimed to be on the smallest scale.
How does this explain a balloon full of helium rising in the air?
Well, that's probably more merely buoyancy.
But buoyancy, for instance, when you look at these videos of outer space, they put a balloon, they cover it with water. The water it sits around it. There's no movement in either direction.
Well,
buoyancy requires gravity.
In quote unquote space. Now,
Very
okay,
good.
that's the claim, but I'm trying to explain really what it requires is little g, which is downward acceleration. That's just the effect. We measure how fast things fall. Big G, or the cause of that, is a totally separate thing. I don't deny little g, and I would actually say I know a better cause for it. There's a downward electric current on the Earth. It's based on the electric field has equipotential increase. So every meter you go up, the electric field on Earth increases 100 volts in potential, and that creates a downward electric current. You can actually read Feynman lectures. I think it's 9.1. He explains this. There's horizontal equipotential lines, and it creates a downward current. It's very weak, but it's very.
Does that
Why
imply
do-
that gravity gets weaker at a distance?
Well, that's what your model would claim as well. Now, I would actually have to get.
Does it?
Yeah, of course. The further away you get from the center of mass, but it would be negligible, and I would actually have to know what the electric field is doing over 50 miles. The most I can independently verify is 30, 35 miles. The mainstream model claims that around 50, 60 kilometers the electric field changes. Well, that's convenient, right? Because that's where we can no longer.
Yeah, but your electric field is starting out there in space and it's coming down, correct?
Well, I do believe I believe that that's a major variable, is that there's tons of electromagnetic radiation coming from the sky, basically coming down to the Earth.
Yeah,
Even
but
Tesla said this.
that implies to me that it's stronger up there than it is down here.
Well, everything goes to seek equilibrium, right? And that's why there's a downward current. You can actually run a generator off
Yeah, but
of the air.
I think we've shown, help me, that gravity gets weaker the higher you go.
Well, and if it's just electrics, then why do neutrons not float?
Okay, you're saying neutrons don't don't have any electric properties.
Correct. They're neutral.
They have a net neutral charge. So they're actually, in your paradigm, I don't even believe in this, but they're comprised of quarks. Well, I don't believe in subatomic pseudoscientific particles. It doesn't matter. You're laughing, but I'm about to show you that you don't understand it. That obviously it's made of quarks, and they're made of elementary charges or fractional elementary charges. So they are fundamentally electric.
Neutrons are electrically neutral, though. So why do they not float?
Are they inherently electric?
They are electrically neutral.
See, I just now directly rebutted this. That's the net charge, but they are inherently electric.
If they're net charge neutral, then why would they not float in your model? If electrostatics is just, if that's the explanation for gravity, why are neutrons affected by gravity?
Okay, because this is your model of neutrons, and that they're material. All material is electrostatic, and you tried to bring up neutrons, and that's what anyone can ever bring up because they think it has no charge. You're wrong. It actually does have charge. Everything does. Everything's electric. That's the true unified theory. They can't invoke this though because it's going to start to have ether and geocentrism pop back in. But the point is, all molecular and intermolecular attractive forces are electrostatic in nature. What that means is all molecules in the world that are held together in any piece of matter, you name it, rubber, sand, glass, wood, name anything in the world, it's held together by electrostatics.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.